your rights to your long-term disability insurance benefits if you're a COVID-19 long hauler. I'm sure that you didn't think you'd ever have to file a claim for long-term disability benefits, or that you'd ever have to file a claim because of a disease that didn't exist when you bought your policy. Unfortunately, in our world today, things have changed. And I know that some with COVID-19 recover and they return to work, while others, who I represent, continue to have debilitating symptoms. And it's just heartbreaking. On December 4, 2020, the government hosted a conference dedicated to long-term COVID-19 patients. And they came up with the moniker COVID long haulers. I'm not sure that that's a good name. Hopefully we'll come up with a better one. But what was important about that meeting is that public health experts urged not only the public and the medical community, but disability insurance companies to recognize COVID-19 symptoms as a debilitating syndrome. And they challenged people to address how long-term symptoms should be treated and how we can address disability. What are the symptoms of long-term COVID which are important in a long-term disability claim? Well, they can include a laundry list of things, either individually or in combination. They can be a cognitive impairment, there can be cough, chest pain, depression, difficulty thinking, or problems with concentrating. There can be fatigue, there can be fever, there can be headaches, heart palpitations, joint pain, muscle pain. There can be a difficulty with shortness of breath. There can be problems with the complications of diabetes or heart issues or strokes, vascular issues. There can be one, or as I said, a combination of these symptoms that can result in disability. And the issue that I think you need to understand is how long-term disability carriers are looking at these claims. Now, what's important about this are going to be three things. First is, what is the definition of disability in your disability policy? Because normally you have to show that you can't do the material and substantial duties of your own occupation, or later any occupation. So we need to understand what the definition is and whether or not there needs to be objective proof. The first issue, of course, is going to be the disability carrier is going to look at what is the diagnosis. Now that shouldn't be too hard because of the testing that is done to establish COVID. But the complications of COVID-19 and the multi-system interaction can also be a problem, because some of the symptoms that I listed are subjective in nature, and they can be really hard for a disability carrier to understand. So once we get past the diagnosis issue, generally of COVID, we need to look at what the diagnosis is of any complications and the objective basis for the diagnosis of those complications. Now, secondly, the carrier is going to be looking at your medical records for the symptoms. And unfortunately, some of these symptoms sound like what you would see in a disease called ME/CFS. The problem with this is that disability carriers always have trouble with subjective-based complaints. Headaches, migraines, fatigue, joint pain, muscle pain, cognitive impairment. There isn't always an objective basis to diagnose those symptoms, but worse yet, there isn't an objective measure of what those symptoms do to your ability to function. Now, using some testing that can be used in ME/CFS cases might be the answer. What do I mean by that? Well, in an ME/CFS case, you can objectively measure fatigue and other symptoms with a CPET exam. It can measure your fatigue, your breathing issues. If you're having pulmonary issues, there's also pulmonary function study tests. If you're having joint pain, muscle pain, that potentially can be measured by a functional capacity evaluation. If you're having neurocognitive issues, those can be measured with neurocognitive testing. So we've got to establish, one, a diagnosis. Two, we have to establish symptoms causally related to the diagnosis. Three, we need to establish that there is an objective basis for the restrictions and limitations. Now, the fourth thing that we need to understand is whether or not there is any policy limitations in your policy, because there are potentially two that can impact your claim. First is the mental nervous condition limitation. And it's not unusual for the disability policy to say that medical conditions as a result of a mental condition or a nervous condition are limited to just 2 years. Now, there is what I call the wafer-thin theory of, or definition of, mental nervous conditions. And that says if you have a psychological condition that contributes to your disability, ever so limited, benefits are limited to 2 years. So COVID-19 sufferers can have cognitive issues that carriers can misclassify as psychiatric or psychological in nature, and naturally you're going to be depressed. But if that depression or anxiety contributes to the disability, and that's the kind of Monty Python wafer-thin definition, you're going to have potentially a problem. The other issue is the subjective medical condition limitation, which basically says benefits are limited to just 2 years. And they'll list a laundry list of symptoms, including headaches, fatigue, joint pain. So potentially your benefits are limited to 2 years. The other issue that you need to understand is that many disability policies require that you get medical treatment, and they want to see a treatment plan. Well, that could be a problem because there is not necessarily a treatment plan. So your physician really has to document your treatment, that it is part of a plan, and you have to continue to get that treatment and avail yourself of that treatment. So you can see that it can be difficult to get your disability insurance benefits for COVID-19. I know that you can't wait to get your disability insurance benefits that are either being delayed, denied, or even in some cases being terminated. So call me today at 727-894-3188 for a free consultation. Learn more about your rights to your disability insurance benefits for COVID-19. Don't let the carrier rob you and your family of your peace of mind.